Welcome to Mythical Phylogeny Adventures. I'm your guide, Jason. I want you to imagine a war in our world. Standing at the front line as a swordsman, his blade resting in its sheath, ready to be drawn at a moment's notice. Beside him were artillery units and tanks. Across the field was the enemy line of riflemen and matching vehicles. Above them, a flurry of planes dove and fired upon each other. As a plane crashed into the ground, the swordsman rushed forward. Bullets flew through the air, barely missing the swordsman. The ground around him is blown apart from a mortar shell, and with it several of his countrymen perish. Covered in dirt, he keeps rushing forward. Just as he reaches the enemy line, the rifleman fires at him, and he falls dead. In this little story, we see why swordsmen have basically been phased out completely in modern warfare. Their destructive power is limited to a single foe per swing. 2 if you are really lucky. But compare it to a rifle, which can take down a dozen foes per magazine and do it at a range while staying safe. A sword is a joke. Now I want you to imagine a fantasy war. Your swordsman is standing beside ranks of spellcasters and knights. Overhead, dragons rain fire down on the troops before clashing with each other. The swordsman rushes forward, fire and lightning rains down as he weaves between the onslaught. He slips as the ground turns to ice. Jumping up, he pushed forward. All around him, his comrades were falling. Finally, he reaches the enemy, only for the opposing mage to unleash a torrent of flames right into the swordsman's face. And this brings up the common issue we see in sword and sorcery. At what point does a swordsman become irrelevant in a fantasy world? And there are 2 ways to make this work, I think. Buff the swordsman, and the more common is to nerf magic. Probably the most common way I have seen a fantasy world balance itself is by weakening magic. Now, there are actually plenty of ways to make it work. Probably the most common method is how rare magic is. This is the minimum magic solution. If only a fraction of the population wields magic, a standard swordsman could very easily still pose a threat in this world. But how many mages is the limit? 1 in a million? You would probably never face a mage then. But what if they are more common? 1 in 10,000? 1 in 1,000? They would definitely be rare. And that would likely lead to the weaponization of magic. Generally, the access to magic comes down to 2 major options. Usually, it is something that you need to be born with. And the other is if it just requires extensive training and study to achieve. If it is the first, I would guarantee that the government of the world would actively seek out individuals with magical potential and get them into the military. Probably not as cannon fodder and given officer status quickly. They will likely be creating incentives to get them to join the military, similar to what we see in solo leveling. Or we can go the darker route, and the government can use force and threatening their families to get the mages to join up. Of course, this will also come down to how well accepted mages are. If they need to remain hidden, that will reduce their potency on the battlefield. Regardless, at this scarcity, the chance of a swordsman facing down a mage is low, so you could still use them. Yet, if we go up to 1 in 100 being a mage, that changes a lot. Most armies will be thousands of troops, with some being much higher. That means dozens of mages. And if we go up higher, it becomes even more glaring. In battle, mages could serve the role of artillery, delivering long-range, high-area effect attacks. And this brings up a rather odd equation that I use. The damage per action second. Okay, I'm still trying to get the perfect verbiage for this, but play with me. It is a rather simple concept. How many foes can you defeat per second in action? If you can defeat 10 foes with 1 attack, but it takes 5 seconds to do it, is that better than 1 foe per second for 10 seconds? Yes, I could do 1,000 damage a second, but what if that is only to 1 foe? Would a better option be to do 50 damage a second and hit 4 foes? This is important when it comes to understanding damage tables. Now a sword can be a 1 attack, 1 kill option, but its downtime comes in moving from target to target. Assuming that mages can just lob fireballs across the field, that would remove the walking limitation. But what is the cast time? 5 seconds? Plus 5 more seconds? Plus another 5 seconds? 15 seconds for 3 fireballs? How many do you get with each fireball? Well, if troops are spread out, less. Of course, what is the true area of effect for a fireball? And the second limitation that I was working towards. A combination of cast time and mana cost. How long is each spell? And how many can you use before you are done? Personally, in practice, I will swing my sword 100 times if not much more. Now of course, in a sword fight, not every attack is going to be a victory. Many will be dodged, parried, or blocked. Even those that hit may be harmless, they are too shallow or not in a fatal location. So less involvement in each attack with a sword, versus a large investment in casting spells, both time and mana. Ultimately, this is one major way many fantasy series attempt to prevent magic from becoming overpowered. Sadly, just about every series that initially attempts to use this limitation eventually fails and starts letting mages cast an endless number of spells without limitations, and their cast time is reduced to 0. A great example of this is the series Naruto. Originally, the ninjutsu magic required hand signs for a cast time. That eventually faded almost completely away by the end of Shippuden. This does allow for more dramatic fights though. Yet there is another way to limit magic. A rather creative one actually comes in the Witcher series. Here, one cost to the use of magic is sterility. Almost all of their magic users can never have children. And this is an interesting take for a couple of reasons. In many series, wizards learn magic from their elders, namely their parents. But in The Witcher, that isn't an option. It helps to limit the number of spellcasters, since it limits apprentices to those taken and volunteered. While it doesn't influence combat, it is more of social impacts on the magic itself. But all of these are limited to situations with minimal magic. What about when magic is overly present? Maximum magic. Well, eventually, I think we would see what happens with the addition of firearms. Eventually, magical research will advance to the point that the cast time and mana cost of spells would reach 0. And a single swordsman is basically just a man waiting to die on the battlefield. But what if we could buff the swordsman? So, how can we make the swordsman better? Well, there are a couple of options. The first is enchantments, magic armor that enhances their speed and strength, something that lets them match the offensive power of mages. Now, spells to enchant their swords isn't the best option. A sword is already a refined weapon to be fatal. But what about making the swordsmen themselves tougher, turning them into literal tanks? Enchant their armor to allow them to withstand blistering heat and freezing cold. In doing this, we can increase their survivability. Sadly, this would be limited by the number and potency of mages again. How hard and expensive it is to create magic armor is another. Do they need to have their magic refilled after a while? But there is another way. Many series, such as Overlord, have other avenues of power, such as ki and martial arts. A power which can be used to enhance the physical strength and speed of warriors. Again, this would work similar to enchantments, but rather be dependent on magic from others. It would be up to the swordsman to learn these arts from training. Now, there is a heavy weakness to magic. Its name varies with the series, either counter magic or anti-magic being common ones. We see this in the Templars of the Dragon Age franchise, or Asta in Black Clover. There are many ways to achieve this, but if a warrior can nullify a wizard's magic, they are reduced to just some guy holding a stick. And we can take a pretty good guess at how those fights end up. The last option is the hybrid approach. It would require swordsmen to attempt to combine magic with their sword skills, or spellcasters which try to learn melee options to counter any fragility that they have. It is like putting a bayonet on a rifle to deal with close-quarter fights. Now, it could result in a whole new styles of magic, which could influence the fight and spur on magical research. A melee spellcaster wouldn't be able to pull off long cast times, so they might try to balance it out by upping the mana cost or go for weaker spells. Ultimately, this brings up the Red Queen scenario. It comes from Alice in Wonderland, where the Red Queen is chasing Alice but can never catch her, and Alice can never escape. Neither is progressing or losing. The swordsman learns a new skill, and the mages must advance their spellcasting to counter. They in turn find a new way to correct their deficits, and now the swordsmen must improve themselves further. This is what will end up happening for a while, but only a while. Swordsmen and melee fighters will struggle to remain relevant, I think. This would result in swordsmen attempting to keep up, yet in doing so, they will find ways to upset the Red Queen race. In trying to remain relevant, They would open up the new avenues which advances the whole study of magic. Now, at what point would this happen? This is going to be hard to say, but we can compare it to our world. When did guns dominate war to the point that it wasn't worth using a sword anymore? Well, most armies discontinued using swords by the end of the First World War. But that was being discontinued, which means for the conflicts prior, they are already falling out of use. So before the invention of tanks, the Gatling gun came out around 1861 and vastly improved the use of firearms. Another factor was the use of bullets with cartridges. The modern hammer-ignited variant appeared about 1847. These allow for the rapid use of firearms and sped up the firing rate. So, in concept, we would be looking at the point where black powder muskets are matched. Now, the speed at which you can load a musket varies with the individual, the short end being as low as 20 seconds. However, less experienced marksmen were longer. So we could assume when the cast time of spells gets to be under 20 seconds is when we will start seeing swordsmen phased out in combat, assuming that they can't enhance their physical traits to keep up. This has become an issue I have come across in my writing. Often when I look at a situation, it would make the most sense to just have the mages spam fireballs to wipe out the foes. What are the swordsmen even needed for? It would seem that there is a limit to how far a swordsman would go in fantasy as well as in our world. Sad, but it is understandable. Would you not agree? Thank you for watching, adventurers. Please return next time for The Fates. Until then, I'll see you on the roads.